It's a combination. It's a very simple formula, and we've been talking about this for quite a long time. As the people who've been following me for years know that, I was one of the first people to call the gold bull run back in 2002, and I called the end of it when it was going to around $1,400 an ounce. It had gone up to almost 2,000 and backed off. And then when it hit around 14, 15, I said, no, this thing's down and it's not going to recover. I said this 5 years ago, that gold wouldn't recover until it went over $1,450 an ounce and stabilized above that. It hasn't done that in 5 years. And we also went on to say that the bottom of gold was around 1,150 to 1,200. Recently, I've been saying 1,200 an ounce, and that's where it is. I'm mentioning this because it has to do with the dollar. The stronger the dollar gets, the weaker gold goes, and the weaker other currencies go. Gold, for example, people would rather buy treasuries that are paying a higher yield with no risk, and there's an opportunity cost for holding gold, and gold pays no interest. So it's a very simple formula, and it's not, what you like, what you dislike, and taking a side on things. It's just what is. So the stronger the dollar gets, the weaker gold gets, and also all of those emerging markets, and that's who you've mentioned: Indonesia, India, with their rupee and rupiah, the Venezuelan bolivar, the Brazilian real, the Argentinian peso, one currency after another, South African rand, the Russian ruble. They're all going down for two reasons. One, the dollar is getting stronger, and these emerging markets borrowed tens of trillions of dollars when the dollar was cheap. And now they have to pay back those loans. Turkey's one of them. Turkey, they have enormous amount of loans in the hundreds of billions of dollars. It's mostly dollar denominated. And you mentioned their lira, the Turkish lira is down some 40% this year. That means their debt load went up 40% because they have to pay that back in dollars.
Scary.
So that's part of it. The other one is the sanctions. The sanctions that Trump has put on Iran, the sanctions they have on Venezuela is a basket case anyway, but the sanctions made it worse. The sanctions on Turkey, the sanctions on Iran, it's sanctions on Russia. It's warfare. There's cyber war, there's economic war, and there's military war. It's a form of warfare. We're stopping you from doing business, and we're going to destroy your economy. They're talking about in Turkey, for example, it has to do with this evangelical minister over there that the Turks, Erdogan, the president, has accused of being behind the coup that tried to overthrow him in 2016. And they're saying, the Americans are saying, that's the reason we're putting on the sanctions, because they won't free him. I mean, come on, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with Turkey's relationship that's building with Iran, Russia, and China. It has to do with Turkey's opposition to Americans supporting the Kurdish rebels in Syria, who they want to get rid of. And it has to do with doing more business using other currencies rather than the dollar. So that's what the sanctions are, because you're looking at Russia, China, Iran, and other nations saying, we don't want to deal in dollars anymore. And as a matter of fact, the new central bank head of India, he doesn't want to have any foreign money in the nation. He wants mostly, the Indian rupee. And of course, they call him a right-wing nationalist for doing that. What they're doing is they want to break away from central banksterism, and on the international level. And by far, like when you look at the trading each day, the forex trading, we're talking over $5 trillion a day. Over 88% of that is done in dollars.
Yeah.
When you look at all of the other current, the euro and the others in trade, the United States is about 60-something% of the trade is done in dollars. So it's a long time away. It could happen gradually and then swiftly, but the dollar dominance is going to maintain itself, not because of the strength of the dollar in terms of our debt load to GDP, which keeps growing, but because the other ones are so weak and they have so many problems. So that's what you're looking at. It's a combination of economics and sanctions that's causing these issues. And if it keeps expanding to levels where it's going, you could have an international market crash.
And it's likely at some point, isn't it?
Well, it's going to happen at some point, and now everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people are saying 2020. And in the years that I've been doing this work, every time when people put a particular date on something, it rarely happens. Sometimes it does. I took out the domain name, the Panic of '08, in 2007. I was very sure of it. It was going to happen. But there were a number of examples that made it more likely, particularly, you're a nice guy, Kerry. You got no dough? I got a house for sale that you could buy. Just sign over here. We're going to call it a subprime mortgage.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing was going on. You don't have that going on now at the level you had before. So you don't have a big, yes, the debt loads are building. Yes, corporate debt is big. But we just don't see it happening in the level of, on the pure economic standpoint. We think it's going to be more of a wild card event. And this kind of wild card event is like the emerging market crisis. We've been talking about this for over a year. And it's very simple to see. But again, hey, what's Stormy Daniels doing today? So nobody's talking about this stuff. But anyway, so no, this is a big story, and that could be the kind of wild card. And then the other wild card, of course, is what's going on with Iran, and the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel taking, trying to bring the government down. And so and then the sanctions on them. So let's go back to the emerging markets and the devaluation of their currencies.
Yeah.
And tie it back into Iran. You're going to have sanctions on Iran going heavy into effect in November. If oil prices escalate beyond $80 a barrel, now they're around $74 a barrel, Brent crude, you're going to see some real problems going on around the world. We're talking about, you mentioned before, India. The Indian rupee is hit just about an all-time low against the dollar. They import 80% of their energy. What's oil? Dollar-based. China, the yuan, 13-month low against the dollar. Biggest oil importer in the world. What's oil based in? Dollars. Chinese economy slowing down. What do they have to do? Now they have to spend more of their money buying oil. So it's not only the debt payments, and of course China not being one of them, they're holding about $3 trillion worth of U.S. notes. But the other nations, of course, they have a debt to GDP level, by the way, in China of about 300 times the GDP.
That's pretty good.
And the United States has one below 100. So they have a lot of debt load. But so going back to the emerging markets and a stronger dollar, it hits in many ways. And that's why we're saying if oil prices break out in the Middle East because of war with Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United States, and Israel against it, these sanctions go on and they start taking a bite and putting oil prices much higher, then that's the kind of thing that we see that could cause a market crash. And but again, look what's happening in Argentina. They got a 40% inflation rate. You know, 40% interest rate.
Right.
And inflation's skyrocketing there. There's no overthrow of the government. So yes, I mean, the people are dissatisfied with the Iranian government, but they're blaming the United States for making their life so hard. So they're not blaming it on the government as much. They're blaming it more on the United States because of the sanctions and the difficulties that the people are having. And it's the same thing with Russia, with the sanctions on them. The people don't blame the Russian government. They blame the United States for making their lives difficult. And that's what sanctions do, by the way. they make the people's lives difficult. The governments rarely fall because of the sanctions. And it just hurts the average person. That's why you're seeing in Italy with the Five-Star Movement and Lega, the League, they want to go back to dealing with Russia. They're against the sanctions that have been put on Russia because the Russians aren't importing that provolone and that prosciutto. You know, it's the small people that are being hurt the most in a lot of these situations. So that's what the sanctions are really a form of warfare. But just as though people really have no concern, for example, about, you know, when people are bombed to death in foreign countries, nobody really cares. But hey, did you hear about that terrorist maybe that ran a car into a crowd in London today?
Yeah.
Or yesterday.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But how about the 50 plus Yemeni children that were killed on a bus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That doesn't get an ounce of coverage.
Naturally.
Because you know why? They're Yemens, man. Who cares? What's a Yemen? You know, they're not white folks, you know? They're not Europeans or Americans. Could you imagine if a terrorist blew up a bus killing 50 white children in America, or any children, black and white, even Hispanic?
Right. Yeah.
Of course, I say that sarcastically. It would be news that would be for weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The military would build up even larger to fight the terrorism, but slaughter 50 Yemeni children, and that's just 50 among thousands that have been killed by the Saudis in an illegal war. That doesn't make the news at all. Again, go back to what we could just keep going back from war after war after war. You could go to the Vietnam War, then it was the Korean War, then it was World War II, then it was World War I, and then it was the Crimean War, then there was the War of the Roses, War of this one, War of that one.
Right.
When you went to school, you had to memorize all the wars.
Yeah. Oh,
you had to get the dates right. Right lies. You know, like what they did to Alex Jones, to me, is terrible.
Yeah, that's
I've been on Alex Jones' show hundreds of times. Mm-hmm. He's always been a gentleman to me. We disagree on different issues.
Yeah.
He's always gave me the platform to say what I want to say. Never once was he disrespectful. This is outright censorship.
Oh, yeah.
Outright censorship. And no one is complaining about it. But yet propaganda is proper. Yeah. You could say that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda, and little low-life, arrogant, slimy people like the New York Times, toilet paper record. Remember how they pumped that, you know, Saddam Hussein's getting them aluminum tubes and baking up all that yellow cake and all of those lies. All the lies that those murderous, little low-life, arrogant SOBs sold us, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you don't believe the crap that they're trying to shove down your throat, then you're a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
No, it's disgraceful. It's censorship. And then you have Facebook and Google. Now they're all working with the Chinese government. They want to get on the good side of them. And of course, when they write about it in the paper, how terrible it is that the Chinese government censors what's on the internet as we're being censored right in front of us. Mm-hmm. Democracy, save it for somebody else. They've been robbing us of our constitutional rights over and over, and it's just getting worse.
Yeah.
Well, we're doing a lot of research on credit markets, realty markets, valuations in that neck of the wood, policies. I think probably one of the facts that I confirmed